The French new wave of directors rallied to support their mentor Henri Langlois in February 1968, when the French government, who funded the Cinémathèque, suddenly dismissed its eccentric director for incompetent administration. Messages of support came from filmmakers all over the world. On the 14th of February, 3,000 people turned out at the Palais de Chaillot to protest. On that fateful day in February 1968, events took an unexpectedly violent turn.
It was really rather incredible. On the one hand, you had these kind of nerdy characters who were the film buffs holding up banners that said, "Film pas flic," films not cops. And suddenly there were these robots, these guys with their masks and their truncheons and their riot guns and their stun weaponry or whatever, and they suddenly charged. Not only was I chased by the police and my fellow film buffs, but Truffaut was beaten over the head and his forehead was bloodied, and Godard was pushed around, and these were, you know, prominent personalities in French culture.
I think in de Gaulle's France, the apparatus of repression in academia, in higher education, was probably stronger than anywhere else, and it was quite strong everywhere. At the Grand Maître, the great leaders of the schools of the University of Paris would have enormous power, and students were kept down. And in the new University of Paris, in Vincennes, where the troubles begin, I think the authorities are having difficulty inventing a new type of university for the great horde of new students who turn up.
To help relieve the pressure of a growing student population, the government built a new university in the working-class neighbourhood of Nanterre. Here, 19,000 students are crammed into a modern but small facility, and they are daily elbow to elbow at cafes and on the streets with workers. The politics of the time, stirred primarily by growing protests against the US war in Vietnam, is creeping into the student population. The administration building is occupied by 150 students claiming to be anarchists. The university is closed until April the 1st.
And so this is where you get the first clashes, and the university authorities call in the cops. And the cops are used to dealing pretty brutally with demonstrators. They've dealt brutally with Algerian demonstrators in recent times. And so they wield their clubs, and actually, before long, the whole clash spirals in the most extraordinary way. I think largely because of the media. There are a lot of television people around in Paris at this time. There's the Vietnam peace talks going on in Paris.
A militant student group forms out of the event, calling itself the March 22nd movement. One of its leaders is Daniel Cohn-Bendit. Following an action in April, Cohn-Bendit is arrested. 400 students from Nanterre go to Paris and to the Sorbonne to protest.
I think there was something there which reached out beyond the normal. The fact that the French government, tried to deport him because he was technically of German birth. The fact that hundreds of thousands of young French workers, as well as students, demonstrated using the banner, "Bring back Cohn-Bendit, we are all German Jews." He was a German Jew. Somehow they were revolting against stereotypes of nationality and race as much as stereotypes of consumerism and stereotypes of the well-behaved student and worker.
The police attacks wake up the student population, and the 400 swells to several thousand. It takes 5 hours to quell the disturbance.
This first means that more and more students come out. students who aren't necessarily political, but just think authority's gone mad, and who also feel stifled by Gaullist paternalism.
More than 100 people are injured. Close to 600 are arrested. That week, tens of thousands of posters calling for action begin to appear in Paris. While the Prime Minister of France, Georges Pompidou, makes state visits to Iran and to Afghanistan, courses at Nanterre are suspended due to the Cohn-Bendit incident. Courses at the Sorbonne are suspended indefinitely. Meanwhile, two unions, the UNEF and the SNESUP, call for unlimited strikes. As the protests become battles, 600 students are hurt, 345 police are wounded, and 422 arrests are made.
What had begun in March 1968 as a student revolt at Nanterre on the outskirts of Paris, by May had become a nationwide protest against the French political regime. Major factories were closed down by strikes, and in Paris, students occupied the University of the Sorbonne.
For the moment then, calm and even gaiety here with the students back in the university and in complete control of the place. They've even set up their own committees to organise their lectures and what they're going to do next.
Television has a new importance in France in the 1960s. In fact, it's only in the 1960s that most French families get a television. One of the first big events to take place before the film cameras, so far as the majority of French people are concerned, are these remarkable events of May where they see the police clubbing students who might be their own sons and daughters. And it's this that creates, out of what began as a quarrel about what students should be doing in a few dorms, something that is in fact a national political crisis.
By the 16th, strikes hit all over the country. Every kind of business and almost every corner of society. Air transport, newspaper deliveries grind to a halt. In 4 days, an estimated 10 million workers will be on strike. By the 18th, filmmakers from around the world join in a boycott of the Cannes Film Festival, and film professionals occupy the festival offices. The jury resigns and the festival is cancelled.
As the demonstrations in the Latin Quarter became a serious threat to the government, they brought in the CRS, the riot police, just as they had a few months earlier at the Cinémathèque at Chaillot.
This was the first time in France that generation of young people had actually managed to effect a change. And it may not have seemed a momentous change. It was, after all, the reinstating of a museum curator. But there was something there, a seed that was sown. And there was a sense that this kind of activism could actually succeed.
Prime Minister Georges Pompidou negotiates with everybody. An agreement is reached between the unions, employers' associations and the government. The following agreements are made. The minimum wage is to be raised, working hours cut, there is to be a reduction in the age of retirement, and workers are given the right to organise. Georges Pompidou accepts the resignation of the Minister of Education. And then, on July 10th, 1968, Georges Pompidou resigns and Maurice Couve de Milleville becomes Prime Minister, saying that it would take until the end of the year to begin the Grande Réforme. President de Gaulle asks voters to decide whether he is to continue as President of France. The country votes on April 27th. Georges Pompidou is elected president on 16th June 1969.